They wore crowns, lived in castles, and bathed in gold. But when it came to hygiene, let's just say the royal glow didn't always smell like roses. From not washing after sex to month-long unwashed corsets, today, we're diving into the 7 dirtiest hygiene practices of royal women. Some are shocking, some are flat-out disgusting, and number 3 might just ruin your image of royalty forever. Backhand index pointing right if you're into twisted history, royal secrets, and the truth they never taught in school. Hit that subscribe button, and let's get into it. Practice number 1, not washing after sex, as status. We usually think of royalty as elegant, clean, polished. But in some of the world's most powerful courts, especially in 17th and 18th century France, Italy, and Spain, not washing after sex was considered a subtle symbol of power. You heard that right. For royal women, bathing after intimacy wasn't the norm. In fact, skipping the bath was a deliberate move. Hygiene in these courts wasn't about being clean. It was about being untouchable. The queen didn't wash, because no one would dare ask her to. Bathtub. Here's what it looked like. After a night with the king, or with a lover, or even both, some royal women would simply get up the next morning, pull on layers of perfume-soaked silk, have their hair fluffed by maids, and head straight to breakfast. Still carrying the scent of sex, sweat, and power beneath their gowns. Kiss mark. But why? Because in the twisted logic of court politics, the more a woman smelled like a man, the more influence she was assumed to have over him. And in those days, smell wasn't shameful. It was status. The king's scent on your skin was proof that you were in his bed. And being in his bed meant you were likely in his ear. No one challenged a woman who could whisper to the king while he was still breathless. Candle. And they weren't subtle about it, either. Court ladies sometimes delayed changing their undergarments for days, wore the same corset until the scent faded, or even encouraged their maids to not wash their bed linens too soon. One French duchess was rumored to apply a touch of musk behind her ears to mask the line between sex and perfume, on purpose. It wasn't just seduction. It was strategy. A way to walk into a room and remind everyone, without saying a word. I was with him last night. You weren't. Crown. And no one dared look her in the eye. Not the other courtiers. Not the rivals. Not even the king's advisors. Why? Because they knew that behind every powerful king was a woman who didn't feel the need to bathe before threatening your entire bloodline. This wasn't dirty by accident. This was dirty by design. Practice number 2, human waste in beauty and skincare. If you thought the no bathing after sex thing was bad, just wait until you find out what some royal women willingly put on their faces. Human waste. And not just as a joke. In the Middle Ages through the Renaissance, urine and feces were common ingredients in beauty rituals, yes, even for queens. Pile of poo. Let's start with the soft one, urine. Known as chamber water, urine was believed to soften the skin and remove blemishes. It was often stored for days, allowed to ferment, and then used as a facial rinse or even a mouthwash. One royal beauty recipe from 16th century England literally instructed: collect the morning's water and let it sit for 4 days in the sun. Then apply gently to the cheeks for purity and glow. Purity and glow, from P. Crown. Royal women believed it worked, and it kind of did. Urine contains urea and ammonia, mild exfoliants. But let's be honest, it was still a face full of hot, fermented pee. And the kicker: the more noble the source, the more effective it was considered. Some queens even demanded their urine come from virgins or pure-blooded handmaidens to preserve youth. Lotion bottle. And now the nastier one. Feces. Yup. In some parts of Europe and Asia, animal dung, and sometimes human feces, were used in beauty treatments and medicine. For example, powdered goose droppings were applied to the face to remove freckles. In Japan, geishas famously used nightingale droppings to whiten their skin. But in certain royal courts, it went darker. Eyes. There are records of early Roman and Egyptian royals using sacred dung as a healing balm. Rubbed on cuts. Applied to rashes. Even, brace yourself, mixed with wine and swallowed to clear the humors. You don't need to Google what happened afterward. But let's just say it didn't end in clear skin. Lipstick, and still, they swore by it. One queen was so obsessed with her beauty rituals, she refused to travel without her mirror trunk, which included tiny glass bottles filled with powdered waste, perfumes to mask it, and special linen cloths to apply it gently. Gentle, but vile. Microphone, punchline wrap-up. So the next time you worry about a pimple, remember, some royal women solved it by dabbing fermented urine on their face, and calling it elegance. Skin like royalty, smells like the chamber pot. Practice number 3, bathing in perfume instead of water. They had marble bathtubs. Gold-plated basins. Servants ready to pour hot water mixed with lavender and rose petals. But do you want to know what most royal women actually bathed in? Nothing. Not even water. Instead, they bathed in perfume. Lotion bottle perfume wasn't a finishing touch, it was the bath. In many royal courts, especially in France, Spain, and Italy, water was believed to be dangerous. It was thought to carry illness through the skin. So instead of bathing, queens and noblewomen would have their maids drench them in layers of perfume, applied to the neck, underarms, back of knees, behind the ears, and sometimes in much more private places. Their bodies weren't clean, they were just covered. Nose, and it wasn't just a spritz. It was a full-body ritual. They used scented oils, crushed petals, vinegars, and musk. Sometimes they would lightly rub their skin with wine-soaked cloths before spraying perfume to open the pores. The scent became their shield, their armor. But underneath the perfume, days, sometimes weeks, of unwashed sweat, old powder, corset residue, and yes, even sex. The goal wasn't hygiene. It was illusion. Kiss-mark perfume was their way of seduction. Some queens were known to create custom fragrances that only their lovers could recognize. One royal mistress in 18th century France was said to wear a signature scent between her thighs so that every man who touched her would never forget. She called it the scent of loyalty. But it didn't smell like loyalty. It smelled like unwashed desire in a silk gown. Crown, and the layering was wild. Some women used up to 15 different scents a day: musk, rose, neroli, clove, ambergris, which comes from whale intestines, and civet, from the glands of a wild cat. They didn't wash off old layers. They just kept adding more. Imagine standing next to that at dinner. A royal woman who hadn't bathed in weeks, but smelled like a burning flower shop and a bottle of wine. Candle, even their clothes were perfumed. Undergarments were soaked in scented water and hung over fireplaces to dry. Corsets were dusted with rose powder. And the most elite women would even spray perfume on their bedsheets, so their lovers would carry their scent for days after. That's not hygiene. That's branding. Microphone, punchline wrap-up. So when you see those royal portraits, perfect skin, delicate fans, elegance from head to toe, just remember, what they lacked in soap, they drowned in scent. They didn't wash away the day. They sprayed it into submission. Practice number 4, wearing unwashed corsets for months. It was tight. It was stiff. It squeezed their ribs, crushed their organs, and dug into their skin. But for royal women, it wasn't just a corset. It was a second skin. And the dirtiest part? They almost never took it off. Not to sleep. Not to sweat. Not even during their period. And they certainly didn't wash it. Thread corsets were made to shape a body, not clean it. Royal corsets were built from bone, linen, silk, and whale baleen. Once laced up, they could only be removed by a maid, and in many households, that happened maybe once every 2 weeks, if not once a month. In between, Royal women sweated in them, bled in them, ate, danced, fainted, flirted, and seduced in them. Some women even gave birth in them. Crown corsets were soaked with every part of their day. Layers of powder would fall from their wigs into the chest. Wine would drip down their chin and stain the silk. Sweat would pool in the curves of their back. Some queens even had special herbs sewn into the fabric to hide the smell, things like dried lavender, mint, or cloves. But after a few days, even the herbs gave up. Coffin and the physical damage was brutal. Doctors of the time recorded rashes, boils, and fungal infections, especially under the bust and near the ribs. Corset stays would dig so deep that maids had to apply powdered lead or crushed pearls just to hide the bruises. In some courts, it was even considered erotic to see a woman's corset lightly blood-stained, like evidence of how tightly she was bound, both literally and socially. Performing arts, it wasn't just hygiene, it was psychological. The corset kept women in their place, restricted, shaped, and silent. They couldn't bend. They couldn't twist. They could barely breathe. And that's exactly how the royals liked it. A noblewoman with perfect posture and pale skin, even if she hadn't washed in days, was seen as controlled, graceful, and desirable. They didn't need her to be clean. They needed her to be tight. So the next time you see a queen in a corset, don't just admire the curves. Imagine what's happening underneath. The sweat. The bruises. The stains. The smell. She didn't take it off. Because royalty wasn't about comfort. It was about control. And she wore hers like a badge of honor. Practice number 5, using lead and mercury to look beautiful. Today, we call it self-care. Back then, it was slow-motion suicide. Because for royal women, beauty meant pain, and poison. Literally. They covered their faces in white lead, painted their eyes with mercury, and dabbed arsenic to fade their freckles. And they did it all in the name of elegance. Lead was the most popular foundation in royal courts. They called it Venetian ceruse, a powdery white paste made from vinegar and lead, applied directly to the skin to create that pale, glowing, almost ghost-like appearance. The goal? Look rich, untouched, clean. But after weeks of use, the skin would crack. The face would swell. The flesh would rot. And the solution? More lead. They painted over the damage like plastering a wall. The paler you were, the more beautiful you were considered, even if it meant slowly poisoning yourself. Mercury was even worse. Many royal women used mercury-based kohl as eyeliner and mascara, especially in Eastern and Southern Europe. It made the eyes look darker, shinier, more seductive. But over time, mercury seeped through the eyelids into the bloodstream. Symptoms included insomnia, tremors, hair loss, and madness. One Italian noblewoman became so erratic from mercury exposure, she was locked in her bedroom for 10 years, but her eyeliner was perfect. And that wasn't all. Some women used arsenic pills to clear acne, dabbing it on their cheeks like blush. Others applied mercury-laced creams to their lips to keep them pink and soft, while slowly poisoning their blood. One queen of France was rumored to go to sleep every night with a silk mask drenched in white lead, tied around her head so tightly she couldn't speak. She died at 37, but everyone agreed her skin was flawless. They knew it was dangerous. And they didn't care. Because to look beautiful was more important than to stay alive. A pale face meant you didn't work in the sun. A smooth jawline meant you had no disease. Rosy cheeks. Health, status, and fertility. Even if they were painted on with poison. So next time you see a royal portrait, soft eyes, smooth skin, perfect glow. Remember this. You're not looking at beauty. You're looking at toxins, pain, and decay, hidden under a powdered smile. The cleaner she looked, the closer she was to death. Practice number 6, lice-hiding wigs and sex-scented powder. When you think of a queen, you probably imagine elegance. Soft curls piled high on her head, pearls tangled in golden strands, powdered white perfection. But behind those gorgeous wigs, it was sweaty. It was filthy. And it was alive. The royal wig was a symbol of rank, wealth, and infestation. In 17th and 18th century Europe, especially in places like Versailles and Vienna, wigs weren't optional. They were mandatory, like crowns. The bigger the wig, the more powerful the woman. Some wigs stood over a foot tall, with braids, bird cages, tiny wax sculptures, and entire garden scenes woven into the curls. But no one talked about what was under all that glamour. Rotting scalps. Open sores. Crawling lice. Royal women often shaved their heads completely bald to wear wigs tightly. But they didn't bathe their scalps. Wigs were hot, tight, and layered over multiple days of sweat, perfume, sex, and social appearances. They didn't get changed nightly. They weren't cleaned. They were worn. And reworn. And powdered to mask the decay. Ladies would scratch until they bled. Lice would crawl from their wig line down their neck, and into their corset. One court diary described a duchess casually removing a louse from her hair during dinner. And tucking it under her napkin like it was nothing. They didn't even try to hide it. Special silver lice combs were created, elegant, thin, and shaped to be carried like jewelry. Some women tucked them into their cleavage for easy access. If a guest spotted one mid-conversation, it wasn't embarrassing. It was a trend. Now let's talk about the powder, the real scandal. Wigs were dusted in thick, scented powder, usually white or pale pink. But it wasn't just flour or chalk. It was perfume. And it was erotic. Made from musk, harvested from the glands of deer or civet cats. Ambergris, from whale intestines. And even sweat or hair from lovers. Powdering was a full ritual, sometimes done in front of mirrors, sometimes in private chambers, and sometimes, with an audience. Kiss mark, there was even sexual symbolism in the powder itself. It wasn't uncommon for a royal mistress to request her wig be scented with the same perfume she used on her inner thighs. That way, when her lover smelled her hair, he'd remember what else carried that scent. Her power wasn't in words. It was in aroma. Intimate. Heavy. Lingering. Performing arts, and the performance didn't end there. Wigs were part of the seduction. A woman being powdered, standing still, neck bare, lips parted, made lifting each curl, it wasn't just hygiene. It was a scene. A tease. A ritual that reminded everyone. This is how royalty smells. Not clean. Not fresh. But unforgettable. Candle, and they paid the price for it. Hair loss. Rashes. Infections. Some queens developed scalp ulcers so deep their wigs had to be padded inside. Others wore them so long that mold began to grow along the lining. But still, they powdered. Still, they smiled. Still, they walked into courtrooms trailing clouds of sex-scented, louse-infested glamour. Microphone, punchline wrap-up. When you picture those royal portraits, a perfect oval face framed in white curls. Remember, underneath was a shaved, bleeding scalp, and enough perfume to mask a battlefield. They didn't wear wigs to look clean. They wore them to look dangerous. Lice and all. Practice number 7: feminine hygiene myths that did more harm than good. If you thought bathing in perfume was bad, or that sleeping in a corset was extreme, wait until you hear what royal women were taught about their own bodies. Because when it came to feminine hygiene, queens weren't just misinformed. They were manipulated. Crowned to be royal, was to be sacred. Untouchable. Mysterious. But beneath the silk skirts and jeweled corsets was a body treated not like a person, but like a temple under surveillance. And when that body did what all bodies do: bleed, smell, change, respond to touch, the answer was never knowledge. It was myth. Always myth. Drop of blood, blood must flow, or evil will grow. Across Europe, noblewomen were told that if their periods didn't arrive on time, their bodies could rot from the inside. That unclean blood would rise to the brain and cause hysteria, mood swings, or even madness. Midwives were ordered to open the womb using crushed herbs and steaming pans of vinegar, placed between the knees. Some were told to drink mixtures of cinnamon, urine, and goat's milk to unblock the bleeding. Others were leeched, yes, leeches, applied to the thighs to draw the blood downward. These weren't ancient peasant tricks. These were palace orders, prescribed to princesses and queens. Candle bathing was forbidden after birth, and often after sex. A freshly postpartum queen was seen as spiritually open. That meant water was believed to seep into her soul, damaging future fertility. So what did they do instead? Sweat her out. Postpartum noblewomen were kept in sealed rooms, windows covered, sweating beneath silk and fur, sometimes for 30 to 40 days. The smell was overwhelming. Maids were ordered to perfume the room with smoldering herbs, frankincense, cinnamon, and myrrh. It was called the lying-in chamber. But it was more like a perfumed prison. And when it came to intimate scent, the rules were even worse. Royal women were expected to smell seductive, but pure. Never too fresh. Never too strong. So they were told to use internal perfumes, dabbing cotton with scented oils and placing it where no doctor would recommend. Musk, rosewater, even powdered amber were soaked into cloth and worn between the legs for hours, sometimes days. The goal wasn't comfort. It was control. A woman who carried the right smell was trusted. A woman who didn't was suspected. Bread, and then came the bread. In multiple royal households, women were advised to use pieces of wine-soaked bread as internal cleansing sponges. Not symbolic. Not ritual. Literal, crumb-flaking bread. Why? Because bread was considered sacred. And sacred things, they believed, could purify dirty places. So royal women carried flour and wine in their night chests, not for baking, but for bodywork. Thread, and what about when they bled? Royal pads weren't disposable. They were silk, lace, and wool, tied in place with scented ribbon. Changed once every day, or every few days. Maids were instructed to clean them discreetly, soaking them in rosewater and hanging them behind the hearth to dry. If someone saw them, it wasn't considered medical. It was considered vulgar. Which is why many queens pretended they never bled at all. Even the act of touching their own bodies was shameful. To clean oneself down there without a maid, seen as improper. Because if a woman could handle her own body, she might start thinking it belonged to her. And in the royal world, that was unacceptable. Microphone, final wrap-up, emotional close. So they bled in silence. They burned incense to feel clean. They stuffed bread into themselves to feel holy. They hid their scent. Hid their sweat. Hid their pain. And the world called it grace. Raising hands, outro, call to action. If you're still watching, you're not just here for history, you're here for truth. So hit that subscribe button, because the next story might just ruin your idea of elegance forever. And remember, when they said she was a clean woman, what they really meant was that she was under control.